the team and general manager Chris Grier have parted ways.
But resulted in only 3 playoff appearances and 0 postseason wins. That change could not wait. We must improve.
Is out officially, and now all eyes are shifted to head coach Mike McDaniel.
So it finally happened. After 25 years with the organization, 9 years as general manager, and exactly 0 playoff wins, Chris Grier is out in Miami. The Dolphins and their longtime general manager mutually agreed to part ways Friday morning, less than 12 hours after getting absolutely embarrassed at home by the Ravens on Thursday Night Football. And let me tell you, there's so much more to this story than just a 2-7 team cleaning house. We've got a racial controversy from Stephen A. Smith. We've got Mike McDaniel somehow keeping his job. We have a potential fire sale coming with the trade deadline just 4 days away, and we got a franchise that looks like it's about to blow everything up and start from scratch again. But here's the thing that should terrify Dolphins fans. This isn't just about firing a bad GM. This is about a decade of catastrophic decision making finally catching up with the franchise that somehow convinced itself it was a contender. So let's break down how we got here, what this means for every player on that roster, whether Miami's about to have the mother of all fire sales, and if your favorite Dolphin is about to be traded in the next 96 hours. Because trust me, this story has layers. Before we get to the content, this video is sponsored. We had a dominant night last night, making $900 with my plays on Prize Picks. I have a play for you guys in this video, but first, make sure you sign up with my promo code Mikerophone to get $50 in lineups when you make a play of $5 or more. On top of that, if you guys want more plays, my Discord server has been absolutely killing it. It's the WAP link in the description down below. It's where I got most of my plays that made me $900 last night. So if you guys want additional plays, make sure you check that out. And thank you, Prize Picks, for sponsoring today's video. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Thursday night, October 30th, 2025, Hard Rock Stadium. The Dolphins are hosting the Baltimore Ravens on national television, sitting at 2-6 and desperate for anything resembling momentum. I mean, coming into this game, Tua had some very interesting press conferences once again, like saying that he couldn't hit Jalen Waddle because he's too short.
With that, some of it has to do with being able to see guys, with their guys also up front and our guys, and I'm not the tallest guy in the back there either, so being able to see, and then sometimes when that happens, you don't want to just throw it blindly.
So you would think that maybe, just maybe, the Dolphins would turn a corner, but nope, Baltimore beat them 28-6, and if you look at the tape, it's not even close. There are a few plays I want to show you from Thursday night, starting with this play at the end of the first half. There isn't too much going on in this play, but with 1 second left in the first half and the ball at their own 49-yard line, Miami was in the perfect situation for a Hail Mary to end the half. Well, that's exactly what they would call. And even better for Miami, Baltimore rushed 5 on this play instead of the 4 that teams would normally bring on a Hail Mary attempt, meaning that there were less Raven defenders in the end zone to try and break up a completion. However, instead of throwing the ball up and hoping that you somehow walk away with 6, Tua drops back 10 yards and takes a sack to end the half instead of at least trying for some points. Now, do I think he would have been able to make it to the end zone anyway? No. But do I think it was at least worth a shot? Absolutely, I do. The next play I want to show you from this game is this. After Lamar Jackson led his 3rd touchdown drive of the game, Tua was put in a position where he basically had to score on the ensuing drive in order to stay alive in this game. And with Miami in a 3rd and 17 situation at their own 6-yard line, it was going to be a major uphill battle to get there. But it was impossible. Miami lines up here with trips to the strong side and a lone receiver to the weak side with Tua in shotgun and Devon Achane to Tua's right. Baltimore comes out with 3 deep safeties on this play, making it known that it's either a cover 3 or a cover 1 robber situation, where the 2 outside safeties would drop down into man once the ball was snapped. A trips offense usually bodes well against this type of defense, with one of the 2 receivers in the strong side slot being able to find a seam in between the 2 deep safeties covering the 1st and 2nd third on that side of the field. And the concept that Miami runs here should execute that to perfection. The slot receiver closest to the offensive line runs a straight go, and the slot receiver in the middle runs sort of an out and up double move to try and break man coverage if it ends up being that. One of those 2 receivers should be open past the sticks. However, despite Baltimore only rushing 4 after their pre-snap alignment wasn't a bluff, Tua completely panics after his first read doesn't immediately free up. It wasn't there. So instead of sitting in the clean pocket he's being given and try to find one of those 2 receivers down the strong side seam, he looks to Achane, who's a check down, and doesn't even complete the pass, resulting in a 4th and 17 in great field position for the Ravens on the next drive. drive, instead of a potential first down if he had just stayed patient. The last play here is one that happened when the game was practically already over, but it's just one that could have easily been prevented. On 2nd and 10 at his own 34-yard line, Tua lines up in the same exact formation that he did in the last play I showed you. And if I'm being honest, I think this was the exact same play, minus the fact that Devon Achane went on a check and release this time instead of sitting behind the backfield as a check down option. Baltimore still rushes 4, and this time Tua does sit in the pocket and make his reads downfield. But the problem is, I think he made them too fast. Once he's dropped back, Tua's looking for something on the right side of the field before shifting his eyes deep down the middle of the field a couple of seconds later. However, instead of making that read and making sure that his guy was open, it looks to me like he decided before he even looked over there that he was going to be throwing this ball. And he ends up throwing a jump ball between a 5'10" receiver, Taj Washington, and rookie safety Malachi Starks, who is a solid 3 inches taller than Washington. Starks ends up coming down with the ball, resulting in Tua's league-leading 11th interception, and it could have all been avoided had he taken his time, just like his last play. And the craziest part is, this is what Tua blamed his poor performance on.
The Ravens fans, it maybe got a little muffled with my cadence and you know, the crowd noise. So, you know, we kind of talked about that on the sideline after and got that corrected.
So you're at home in Miami and your own quarterback is complaining about the visiting team's fans being too loud in your building. That's where we're currently at. Stephen Ross woke up Friday morning, looked at his team, and apparently decided that he'd seen enough. By 11:30 a.m., Chris Grier was out. Ross released a statement saying change could not wait and that the team needs to improve in 2025, 2026, and beyond. Translation is, it looks like we're rebuilding again. Now, Grier being fired shouldn't surprise anyone who's paid attention. What is surprising is the timing. 4 days before the trade deadline, and the fact that Mike McDaniel somehow survived. We'll get to McDaniel in a minute. First, let's talk about how Chris Grier systematically destroyed what could have been a contender. Chris Grier became the Miami Dolphins general manager in 2016, and over his 9-year tenure, he made 61 draft picks. Do you want to know how many are still on the roster? 22. Do you want to know how many are actual starters or significant contributors? About 8, maybe. That's a 16% hit rate over 8 years of drafting. 16%! You could literally throw darts at a draft board blindfolded and probably do better. Let's start with the Hall of Shame here. In 2017, Grier took edge rusher Charles Harris in the first round. Total bust. Harris was out of Miami after just 2 seasons. In 2020, he had 3 first-round picks and used one on Noah Ibginagin, who was such a reach that Miami Dolphins fans were screaming about it in real time. Noah couldn't get on the field in Miami, bounced to Dallas, and now he's actually playing pretty well for the Commanders. So he wasn't the problem. Miami's development was. Liam Eichenberg in 2021, mediocre at best. Channing Tindall in 2022, barely contributes. Cam Smith in 2023, he was in Vic Fangio's doghouse before Fangio left. And here's the thing that makes all of this worse. Grier didn't just miss on his picks, he actively passed on future stars. The Dolphins took Harris over TJ Watt. They took Ibginagin when guys like T. Higgins and Michael Pittman Jr. were still on the board. They took Kenneth Grant at 13 this year, 1 spot before the Colts grabbed Tyler Warren. I mean, the Colts literally laughed at the Miami Dolphins for this. Tyler Warren already looks like a future All-Pro, but wait, it gets even worse. Of Grier's 61 draft picks, 17 are now playing for other teams, and a bunch of them are starters. Robert Hunt was great for Miami, but they let him walk, and now he's getting paid by another team because Grier doesn't like investing in interior linemen. Brandon Jones, he's making an impact for the Denver Broncos. Raekwon Davis, he's playing elsewhere. Grier was so bad at talent evaluation that he let good players leave and couldn't develop the ones he kept. And don't get me started on this year's draft. Grier traded up to take offensive tackle Patrick Paul in the 2nd round, and Dolphins fans immediately hated it because Cooper Beebe and Kingsley Sumatia were both still available. Grier's explanation was he was the highest rated player on our board. Cool, Chris, your board has been wrong for a decade. But Grier's failures go way beyond the draft. Let's talk about how he absolutely butchered the Dolphins salary cap with some of the worst contract decisions you'll ever see. Let's start with Tua. Last July, Grier gave Tua a 4-year, $212.4 million extension with $167 million guaranteed. At the time, some people defended it, saying Tua led the league in passing yards in 2023 and deserved to get paid. But here's the problem. Tua has a history of concussions and has never won a playoff game, and the contract is so backloaded that cutting him before 2027 would result in $99.2 million in dead cap. That would shatter Russell Wilson's previous record. Tua's contract is essentially untradeable, and the Dolphins are stuck with him no matter how bad things get. And it's not like Tua's been lighting it up this year. He's thrown multiple interceptions and losses, looked terrible in big games, and the team is 2-7. One analyst called it one of the worst contracts in the league because Tua is too much of a risk with his injury history. But Grier gave him the money anyway. Then there's Tyreek Hill. Hill counts $27.6 million against the cap this year, and cutting him would cost over $55 million in dead money. He's 31 years old, clearly wants out of Miami based on his comments after last season, and now his trade value is basically nothing. Grier restructured his deal last year, which kicked the cap hit down the road, and now the Dolphins are paying the price. And Jalen Ramsey, man, that's a whole saga. The Dolphins traded Ramsey to the Steelers back in June along with Jonnu Smith, getting back Minkah Fitzpatrick. Ramsey wanted out. The relationship was toxic, and Miami had to dump his contract just to get some cap relief. But here's the thing. Grier gave Ramsey a new contract just a year earlier. He paid big money to a 31-year-old cornerback, and within 12 months, both sides wanted a divorce. That's how badly Grier mismanaged the situation. Grier overpaid for Tua, Tyreek, and Ramsey. He let good players like Robert Hunt, Christian Wilkins, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Javon Holland walk in free agency because he didn't want to pay them. And now the Dolphins have no cap space, no depth, and a roster full of expensive veterans who aren't winning games. So Chris Grier is out, but Mike McDaniel, he's staying for the rest of the season according to Adam Schefter, and I cannot emphasize enough how wild this is. Mike McDaniel is 30-30 as the Dolphins head coach, not 30-30 over 5 or 6 years. He's 30-30 over 3.5 seasons. He's 9-15 over the last 2 years. The Dolphins made the playoffs in 2022 and 2023, but they got bounced in the wild card both times. And this year, they're 2-7 with losses to some of the worst teams in football. They lost 31-6 to the Browns 2 weeks ago, and Cleveland is terrible this year. McDaniel has had 6 3-game losing streaks during his tenure. 6! And yet somehow he's still here while Grier is gone. So why? Well, according to Stephen A. Smith, this is why.
It was about Tua. It was about Mike McDaniel. And the brother get fired first. I better hear Mike McDaniel's name today.
Oh my God.
Better not be just Chris Grier. Listen, I'm all for brothers as head coaches, GMs. We know what battles I've been fighting for over 30 years.
Okay, I'm not going to go down that road. Look, Chris Grier was in charge of the Dolphins roster for 9 years and didn't win a single game. He had a 16% draft hit rate. He overpaid for veterans. He let good young players walk and built a team with no depth. Meanwhile, Mike McDaniel has been there for 3.5 seasons and is exactly 500. If you're going to fire someone first, it makes sense to fire the guy who's been failing for a decade, not the coach who just got there and actually got you to the playoffs for 2 seasons. Also, this is important, Mike McDaniel is biracial. His father is black, so Stephen A. framing this as
They kept the white coach and fired the black GM
isn't even accurate. Stephen A. also conveniently ignored that McDaniel is almost certainly going to be fired too. He's just getting to finish the season first. This wasn't about protecting McDaniel, it was about Ross recognizing that Grier's failures ran deeper and longer than McDaniel's. The reality is that Stephen Ross really likes Mike McDaniel and believes in him despite the results. But there's a limit to that patience, and McDaniel is testing it. The other factor is that Ross clearly believes the roster construction was more of a problem than the coaching. And to be fair, that's probably true. Grier built this team, and it's filled with holes. No offensive line depth, no backup quarterback, no physicality on either side of the ball. McDaniel inherited some of that, but he also had input on roster decisions, and he didn't exactly sound the alarm about any of it. McDaniel himself has gotten heated when asked about his job security. After the Browns loss, he told reporters it would be offensive to all parties involved to focus on anything other than coaching the team. He said as long as he's employed, his job is to focus on improving and not worrying about getting fired. Here's my take. McDaniel is safe through the end of the season because Ross doesn't want to make 2 major changes at once. But if the Dolphins hire a new GM, that GM is probably going to want to bring in his own coach. And if Ross gives the new GM the power to make that call, McDaniel is done. He knows it, we all know it, it's just a matter of when. So now we get to the really juicy part. The trade deadline is on Tuesday, November 4th, and the Dolphins might be about to blow it all up. According to ESPN's Marcel Luis Jacquez, the Dolphins received trade calls on several key players in recent weeks, including Jalen Waddle, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Matthew Judon, Judon, and Rasul Douglas. Greer reportedly wasn't willing to deal any of them, but now that Greer is gone and Champ Kelly is making the calls, what does that change? Well, absolutely everything. Champ Kelly was the Raiders' interim GM in 2023, and he's got a reputation as a respected evaluator who isn't afraid to make tough decisions. He started his NFL career with the Broncos as a scout. He worked his way up through the Bears front office and was the assistant GM in Las Vegas before taking over as interim GM when they fired Dave Ziegler. He's been interviewed for multiple GM jobs across the league, so he's well respected. But here's the thing about Kelly. He's interim. He's not the permanent GM. So his incentive right now is to show Stephen Ross that he can maximize value and make smart, aggressive moves. And the best way to do that is to sell off assets, stockpile picks, and set up whoever the next GM is for success. So let's go through the potential trade candidates. Jalen Phillips has been mentioned in trade rumors for weeks. He's talented when he's healthy, but he's coming off of major injuries, and his availability is a major question mark. Phillips himself said that his preference was to stay in Miami, where he played college football and was drafted in the first round in 2021. But if a contender offers a second or a third round pick, Miami might have to take it. Bradley Chubb is in a similar situation. Chubb restructured his deal this year to help the cap, but he's expensive going forward and might not be part of the long-term plan. He's a veteran pass rusher who could help a contender, and Miami might be able to get a decent pick for him. Jalen Waddle is a huge one. He's under contract through 2028 and is only 26 years old, so trading him doesn't make sense if you're trying to build for the future. But if a team offers multiple first-round picks, can Miami say no? Waddle is a legitimate weapon, and with Tyreek Hill aging and possibly wanting out, keeping Waddle should be a priority. But in a fire sale, nothing is sacred. What about Matt Judon? The Dolphins picked him up as a veteran edge rusher, and he's been solid. But if they're rebuilding, why keep a 33-year-old pass rusher? He could bring back a mid-round pick from a contender. Here's what I think happens. Miami trades Chubb and Judon for mid-round picks. They hold on to Waddle and Phillips because they're young enough to be part of the next core, and they field calls on everyone else but don't get offers that move the needle. The wild card is Tyreek Hill. Greer said back in April that it would take 2 first-round picks to pry Hill away from Miami. That's not happening. But if a team offers a late third or a fourth-round pick, which is probably Hill's actual value given his age and contract, does Miami pull the trigger? I don't think so. Hill's dead cap hit is too massive, and no team is going to take on that contract without Miami eating a ton of money. But the fact that teams are even asking tells you how bad this situation has gotten. So where do the Dolphins go from here? Well, let's game this out. The best case scenario is that Kelly makes some trades, gets value for guys who aren't part of his future, and holds on to the core pieces like Waddle, Phillips, and Tua. The Dolphins finished the season 6-11 or 7-10, showing enough fight that Ross feels good about the direction. They hire an established GM in the offseason, possibly someone like Joe Horitz or Ryan Cowden, who have been gaining traction in GM searches. That new GM evaluates McDaniel, decides to keep him with some staff changes, and Miami uses a top 10 pick on offensive line help or a defensive stud. They retool in free agency, get healthier, and potentially compete for a wild card spot in 2026. The worst case scenario is Kelly panics and either makes bad trades or refuses to trade anyone, missing the chance to add picks. The Dolphins sleepwalk through the rest of the season, finish 3-14 or 4-13, and earn a top 5 pick. Ross fires McDaniel after the season, hires a new GM who wants to bring in his own head coach, and Miami enters year 1 of yet another rebuild. Tua's future becomes a massive question mark. Tyreek demands a trade, and the Dolphins waste another 2 or 3 years trying to figure it out. I think the most likely scenario is Miami trades Chubb, Judon, and maybe one more veteran for picks. They finish around 5-12, landing somewhere in the 8 to 12 pick range. Ross hires a respected GM who decides to move on from McDaniel and brings in a young offensive mind or a defensive-oriented coach. Tua gets one more year to prove it with a new scheme, and if he can't, the Dolphins draft a quarterback in 2027. They're not good in 2026, but they're building towards something sustainable rather than trying to win now with a flawed roster. The big question is Tua. His dead cap hit makes him essentially untradeable until 2027, so unless he retires due to concussion concerns, which is a real possibility, the Dolphins are stuck with him, and if they're stuck with him, they need to build around him properly. That means offensive line. That means a competent backup. That means receivers beyond just Tyreek and Waddle, and it means a defense that can actually stop someone. Greer failed to build any of that. Can the next guy do any better? We'll see. Let's be clear about something. Chris Grier was not a good general manager. During his 9-year tenure, the Dolphins had 5 winning seasons and 3 playoff appearances, but didn't win a single postseason game. Miami's 25-year playoff win drought is the longest active streak in the NFL, and most of that falls on Grier. His draft record is abysmal. His contract management was worse. He let good players leave and overpaid for veterans who didn't move the needle. He hired Adam Gase, Brian Flores, and Mike McDaniel as head coaches, and none of them got Miami over the hump. But Grier did have some wins. His first ever draft pick as a GM was Laramie Tunsil, who became a Pro Bowl tackle, even though Miami traded him away. He also drafted Xavier Howard, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Christian Wilkins, Jalen Waddle, and Jalen Phillips. He traded for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey, both of whom were elite at the time, and he orchestrated the Tunsil trade to Houston that netted Miami a haul of picks. The problem is that Grier couldn't capitalize on any of it. He drafted well occasionally, but couldn't develop the players. He made big trades but overpaid to keep the guys he acquired. He had all the resources to build a winner and he squandered them. So the Chris Grier era is over, and honestly, it should have ended years ago. This is a franchise who has been stuck in mediocrity for a quarter century, and Grier was a huge part of that. He had his chances, he made his moves, and they didn't work. But let me know in the comment section down below, do you think Mike McDaniel survives this? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.